Well, welcome everybody to the Marketing and Tech Working Together panel. I'm here today. I'm Jennie Lewis from the Airship team. I work on the strategic services side of the business in North America, and we help our customers with customer experience research, campaign operations, reporting and analytics, and all manner of things. Also like to welcome my counterpart, Ramsey.
Yep, Ramsey, Kail. I manage the global technical CS resources. That's our technical account managers, our technical consultants. And our role is really to help our customers implement and utilize our products to achieve their business goals.
Fantastic. So let's dive into it. We've got a couple of slides for you guys, and we'll get into a discussion. Ramsey, I'd love for you to take it away on our favorite comic here.
So this is something that has obviously been around the internet for about as long as the internet has existed, but it really rings true, which is that the communication within a team is crucial to getting the the thing I love about this comic is that every single team is 100% sure that they're doing the right thing, that they're doing the task that was set before them. And ultimately what the customer wanted isn't in any of their visions. So it's a very, poignant diagram, that kind of encompasses a lot of the challenges we're gonna be talking about today.
Fantastic. And I know as Ramsey and I were prepping for this session, we started thinking back on some of our experiences in the room doing marketing technology integrations. And I think that we often hear really different sides of the conversation. So, we thought of a couple one-liners that represented those conversations that we've had in the past.
I love whenever I go into a meeting and hear that a particular marketing campaign is going to drive $11 billion worth of incremental revenue through, a single channel. It totally makes sense from a tech perspective.
Absolutely. And when the technology folks come to me and they just say, you know what, Jennie, you just don't understand how the system works. It's really helpful to move the conversation forward and have a lot of collaboration. Awesome. All right. So what we did, we put together a few ideas to share with you about how we think it could be better, right? How do we think that these teams, marketing and technology, can both partner up and come together with a better customer experience? So our three pillars that we envision really help move those conversations forward. All right, so first up, define and align. How are you defining requirements and aligning on those across all of the teams, right? Each team, each functional area have super important tasks and information that they want to share. And if we don't align on those as a shared cohort, we're not going to get very far. We're going to come back to that situation that we saw in the comic.
One of the things that I've seen as a result of this is, not assigning ownership to a team or a person as it relates to the outcomes is basically a death sentence to getting things done. Ultimately, if you ask somebody, hey, can you do this? That's not the same as saying, I need you to do this by this date with those outcomes. So being direct, detail-oriented is usually going to drive much better outcomes. So,
yeah, absolutely. And you don't always have to have a formal RACI chart, right? I mean, maybe it's just a simple checklist and coming to that shared agreement of not just assuming that the other guy's got it. All right, so second pillar, shared vernacular. So singing from the same songbook, so to speak. Yeah, Ramsey, you want to jump in on this from the tech perspective?
I mean, it's really important to have a POC in any FBI or FIB that you might be doing with the ETA, that the outcomes are impacting the company's KPIs. You got that?
Absolutely. And that it just all made sense just right off the bat. So I think that each team uses different systems. Each team has a different shorthand and communication, right? And if we don't understand each other, we're all going to be speaking different languages. So what are those translation services between different parts of the organization? Right. And third pillar, right before we jump into the discussion here, Google Slides is arguing with me. 1 second. Well, there he goes. Create way stations. So, if you think about a way station on a highway, not that too many of us are driving too many places now, but imagine, all the way stations as you're coming down the highway, right? Creating those checkpoints to make sure that whatever you said you were setting out with is the thing that you have at that point along the conversation. So what are the milestones? What are the deliverables at each stage that are important to all the different functional areas? And how do you kind of have, a consistent infinity loop where you're going out and each team are doing their work and then they're coming back together and having these checkpoints in between?
I think one really important piece with that is just the reason to do something like assuming that the work is being done is a very good way to get to the end or get to a deadline and find out that nothing has been done as expected. And honestly, I've worked with a lot of different teams. I've had disagreements with people, obviously, before in my career, and what I've found is that nobody's set out to do the wrong thing. They're usually given the wrong instructions, or they make assumptions about what those instructions mean without validating with others because they assume that they're supposed to just do their job. By setting these way stations, by checking in, by making sure that you're interacting with people, you find that you're not necessarily expecting them to do it. Plus, it avoids.
Exactly. So we would love to hear your input on. There's a couple ways you can participate. You can jump in and participate on video, or we also have the chat here. I've already seen some really good comments coming in on the chat. The first one I would love to call out is the comment about code switching, right? So if you've got, technology language and you're talking about deep e-commerce integrations, but then somebody also wants to talk about, what happens when somebody walks into the store or stops on the e-commerce site? What are the steps that they go through and the different things that they encounter? 100% agree with this comment about code switching. I don't know, Corey, if you want to add anything else there. All right, and you can also just reply back on the chat, or like I said, jump in on the video. Ramsey, you see any other comments here yet for the discussion?
The one about acronyms is really poignant. I think acronyms, in and of themselves are not bad. I think the problem is that everyone assumes that everyone knows what the acronym means. You have to, at least the first time somebody's hearing it, explain what it is that you're trying to get across with that acronym. I still use, whenever I'm typing out an email, I'll fully spell out things like technical account manager and then explain that that's TAM, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows what TAM means. TAM also means total addressable market. So when I'm talking to people, I have to be very careful about how I use those acronyms. The acronyms themselves aren't bad, but using just acronyms without first setting the stage for what you mean by those letters is a recipe for disaster. And yeah, I would love if anybody wants to jump on, you can do the ask for audio and video. It'd be really good to get some conversation going. Obviously, Jennie and I keep talking, but would love to somebody else jump.
Yeah, it looks like some folks are trying to jump up in the video and just encountering some buttons. I know if you upgraded to Catalina recently, you're going to be giving a lot more permissions than you expected to need to every time you try to share your screen. I think, Ramsey, as folks are trying to join in, I'm curious, have you had any experiences in your work history where you've been in a situation where maybe folks weren't aligned when you went into a room in a conversation?
I would say most of the meetings I've been in weren't necessarily aligned at the beginning of the meeting. It usually, the challenge is everybody comes to a meeting with their own history, their own expectations, their own set of requirements, their own goals in the meeting. And I think one of the key things to any meeting is just setting the stage of, here's what we're here to discuss. We're not here to go on some wild tangent about something that you want to do 6 months from now. We're not here to talk about something that was done 6 months ago. We're here to discuss this issue with this context for this purpose. And in doing so, it tends to, better set the stage for effective meetings. And it looks like we got some people joining the video. I see Kail, obviously Amber, who's always here to help. So
I wanted to say, I don't see people to approve them. So if you're waiting for me to be able to do that, I can't see them, Jenny. So if you see people in the bottom left of yours where it says moderator, I think you might have to approve each person.
I was going through and adding them just now. I figured out the
okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Hi, Kail.
Hey, Kail. Welcome to the discussion. Was there something you wanted to add in?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on the whole acronym thing since I posted that comment, and I completely agree, Ramsey, with what you said about, the acronym itself isn't the enemy, even though I said I despise acronyms, but every time I write an email or something like that, I always do what you do and make sure, if there's a report that you're sending out every week that you want to, consolidate by putting the KPI or whatever the acronym that you use in there is fine, but I think it is really important to spell out every time you send that report out what each acronym means, because I know, like, when I join a team, even within an individual team, they might have acronyms that they use that are only specific to that particular product team. So it's so important, like, if someone new joins or someone new is on an email that they don't normally get, and you start seeing all these acronyms, and it can be really intimidating to even want to speak up and ask what they are, because it gets used so often that you might think, oh, well, maybe I should know what it means by now for using it every day. I just think that's so important. And I thought I'd share a quick funny story of when I did an internship at Bank of America. We had a senior manager that really, everyone warned me when I did presentations. They're like, oh, he hates acronyms. Make sure you don't have acronyms on any of the slides that you're using. Don't use acronyms when you're talking. So I do my presentation and I'm avoiding acronyms at all costs. And then one thing that I mentioned was FIFO. And I'm like, oh crap, I just said an acronym. So I look at him and I go, first in, first out. And this is a 65-year-old managing director at Bank of America who clearly knows what FIFO means. And he just looks at me and he goes, I know what FIFO means. You don't have to spell that one out for me. So I thought that was fun.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Anyways.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining. I'll hop off now.
All good insights. Corey, welcome.
UX designer here. I guess one of my challenges has not only been with other teams, but also internally. Like, even two different designers, they can think things totally different depending on where they are in their career. So many times we're working on a project and all of a sudden we're very misaligned on what we're delivering. And I realize there's a lot of cognitive tension in there. That's kind of, we want to just avoid the uncomfortable thing of, hey, no one really knows what's going on in this meeting, even though everyone's just consenting because maybe they feel anxious and want to get it over with, or they just feel like perhaps they're not going to come to an agreement anyways. So how do we kind of get those questions out in the open and motivate people to see the inconsistencies? That's been my challenge recently.
I think one of the things that I've seen that works really well with that is, and you have to frame it correctly. There's a lot that comes in with tone with this, but asking people why they want to do something a certain way and having them step through the explanation can really help with that. Because again, I've, especially working with UX teams, I've worked with UX teams before. We're like, well, we can't put this button there. I'm like, but that's the button that I need because that's what I've been told to put. So I totally understand. And so generally what I'll do is exactly that, and say, well, why can't we put the button there? Well, we can't put the button there because we have a pop-up that shows up over it, and this is what happens, and this is what happens. Great. Like once you have that context, it helps. I think, and again, just kind of seeking to understand the other side, seeking to understand where they're coming from can be very helpful with that. And then setting out the requirements of whatever it is helpful as well. But
absolutely. And Corey, I think you made a really good point about folks who are at different stages of the career, right? So, how do folks with more experience take the time and the patience to interact and educate with folks who are coming up, right? Because the more we train, folks coming up and give them a chance to learn from us, right? And instead of assuming that they're just going to get it, or I know early in my career there were some things where it was like, well, just go figure it out, and maybe you do, and maybe you don't, right? And it certainly would have been easier if that education piece had been there. Give them a chance.
Yeah, and I think that
Do we have some? Was there somebody coming in on the audio? No? Okay, Corey, please go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, and I think that definitely asking people why and to step through it is really, it does take some vulnerability, because people have to think like, maybe I don't know why. And so that is very key. I think somehow emotional intelligence is like a big part of all of this, and being able, because you also have to be vulnerable to say I don't know, and also you might feel like you might look stupid, honestly, asking certain things that you have no idea about. So that is one of the challenges that I had too, that I had to overcome, is having the tough conversations.
Yeah, and I think that it's a super point, right? Like having those fresh eyes. I know from like a design thinking methodology perspective, fresh eyes is a huge thing. How do you go into it without bringing along all your assumptions that you've like from whatever you've done in the past, right? It's always good to have the background knowledge, but if you don't take fresh eyes, then you're not going to be able to see it from a new direction. Awesome.
Peter, did you have anything to add to that?
So actually, my audio dropped out for a bit, so I only
we're talking about how to
coordinate
responses, especially like if you're working with people who are on the same discipline as you and you don't agree. How do you?
Right. I'll catch up to the whole thing. Now the reason I chimed in a little earlier was just in regards to the overall KPI thing.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't hear that part. Sorry about that. There has to be building these 5-second stops in between people talking.
No worries.
Like
one thing just from the chat, if I could throw one in, Melanie had shared that there are updates coming in from the product team that are perceived small updates, but marketing team would really like to know about them before they go out so that they could tell customers, any ideas on how to streamline that, without, and I just to read this bit, I like it a lot, without having multiple long status meetings between both teams. Yeah, that makes it difficult and very time consuming, but is there a better way to get that communication flow going?
I mean, I can chime in with we do at Airship, which is really nice, is we have our ship it emails that we send out internally that alerts the entire company whenever we have new product features that are coming out. The product managers, take a lot of pride and ownership in putting those ship-its together. They pull in all of the different teams and people on those teams who are part of it. Anybody from the CS team that helped, test it or scope it, like gets those emails or is included in those emails. So there's a lot of eyes on those ship-it emails, which is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that is, it's not only just the email, right? It's the link to the training presentation. It's the link to the documentation, right? It really summarizes all those updates. I feel like we're getting 3 or 4 of those a week lately, Ramsey.
Yeah, and I mean, well, especially recently, had some really cool product features come out. So it's been nice to kind of see those coming through.
Yeah, just flying through. Want to throw in here just a quick tech note that Amber had shared. I want to make sure everybody sees that if people are trying to join and still having trouble, and Amber, I think it's if you refresh your screen, then more folks can get in. Is that correct?
If you refresh your web browser, yeah, you'll kind of get disconnected from the session for a sec, but you'll get right back in, and then it will show you that up to 20 are allowed. I did want to join in case you wanted to jump in and say something.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, Gabrielle.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Gabrielle. Really just jumping in because I currently work in an operations role at Full Stack Academy, which is a coding bootcamp. And so right now we're facing a lot of problems where marketing is really overloaded with tasks to manage COVID response and like how our company is responding to it, both internally and externally, which impacts my ability to operationalize the customers that are going through the pipeline. And in this pandemic and the remote situation, some things have really been hard to communicate and keep a good cadence. So that's kind of what I was coming here to really figure out how other companies are maintaining this cadence and like how I could maybe advocate for one in my own company. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. You want to jump?
Yeah, I was going to say if anybody else on the panel wanted to chime in with that as well. But I think the key thing, especially with communications like that, is understanding well, and making sure other people as well understand the priority, right? Like, obviously with everything going on, sending out updates around, availability within, the COVID environment and how people can access the capabilities of your team and things like that. That's critical things, but there's other critical things that a lot of times don't fall into that scope. And so I think the trick is, again, it comes down to having a conversation with the people that are responsible for kind of setting that marketing cadence, and making sure that at least they can respond to where your communications fall on the priority, like why certain things aren't in there. And again, I think that one of the things that Corey said that's really important is you have to be vulnerable in the sense that, like, I am incredibly guilty of this. Jennie can back me up on this. I think everything that I'm working on is the most important thing in the and sometimes I have to be told it's
I've
not.
never heard you say that, Ramsey. What are you talking about? It's a shock.
Right. So sometimes it becomes, you kind of have to invite those opinions from others, and then through that you can usually find a path to get pieces of what you're trying to get done quicker, rather than, and that's another thing too is don't try and have marketing. There's the analogy of eating the elephant, right? Like if you present them like, I need to send 50 messages out, here's my schedule, get it done, they're gonna go, I don't have time for that. So like finding ways to piecemeal it out, giving people smaller, more manageable chunks of work is a really good way to handle that.
100%. I mean, and Ramsey's going to laugh at me when I say this one, but cross-functional alignment, right? It doesn't have to be a super long status meeting, but how are you having those checkpoints as cross-functional parts of the organization? I think is super important. I saw Sam jump in. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to throw in the discussion here.
Yeah, mine's more of a comment, but I'm in an SDR role, and I think like everything that everyone's talking about makes a lot of sense, but I also see it go like the other way. So I try to go out of my way and meet with some of the more technical folks on our team, like on the engineering team, and we'll just have conversations about what each of us are working on. And a lot of times I'll talk about a workflow that I do, or maybe it's something like a tedious like list building process, and given their expertise, they're able to like help me find new ways to make processes more efficient and automate certain things. Or I think like it's really important to just like have a feedback loop both ways and like kind of play off each other's strengths. And it's like freed up a lot of my time to focus on the less tedious parts of the job and kind of automate them where we can, and then focus more on like putting together really specific and relevant contacts or content to send out to potential customers.
Yeah, and I really like that concept of and it's something that I talk to my team about all the time, as I tell them, like, you're responsible for making sure that this particular piece of work gets done. You don't necessarily have to do it by yourself. So like if there's things that other people on the team can help you with, if there's things that you can pull from other orgs, there's no reason to spend 10 hours trying to do something that'll take somebody else 10 minutes, right? Like if it's that level of effort, it makes a lot of sense to go outside of your comfort zone and invite people into the problems that you have, and you might find somebody who can solve it for you. Really.
Exactly. And a lot of times it just comes from a natural conversation, like every other week, grabbing a 30-minute coffee and just catching up on what we're working on. And then you learn something that really ends up making a big difference. So I found that to be really helpful.
Yeah.
100%. Sorry, Gabrielle, go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in because I know that grabbing a 30-minute coffee isn't necessarily feasible in a lot of places right now. So I'm wondering if like you've found other ways to keep that cadence and like that open communication for this reciprocity that you're discussing.
Yeah. I've tried to mimic it a little bit just with like a Zoom call to catch up, but I will say it's easier to come up with an excuse to like postpone it. So I haven't been as good as I think I was in person, but I definitely still try to like catch up with people every once in a while over Zoom call. And then I also think, kind of on a similar note, doing a screen share, like in the office, maybe it's coming over to your desk and looking over your shoulder as you go through a workflow, whatever it may be. But I also think that really like sharing and walking them through how you're doing certain tasks, it sounds like it can be a little like it take a little bit of extra time, but I think it really like it takes doing that a lot of times for people to really understand your pain points and your thought process. And a lot of times I see that being really beneficial also.
And I think I wanted to add on to that. So I think one of the things that might also help you is process. So what Sam was, I think the way you can interpret what he's saying is they may not understand your process. You may not understand their process. But I can give you an example of last week, we wanted to do a LinkedIn marketing campaign on the website, and everyone had an idea of what should go in that campaign after it had already been designed. And the process is the designer makes it, the marketing people approve it, or marketers, whatever you want to call them. And then the developer puts it on the website. But I woke up to like a 20 email thread chain about everything that needs to change. And I'm like, no. At first I felt kind of panicked, like, oh my God, I have to do all these changes. But then I realized, wait, no, that's not the process. So it's kind of like, I don't know, cracking the whip or what you want to call it, but just sticking to a certain process that everyone knows what it is, and you are not going to get overwhelmed. Because I said, listen, you guys are not approvers of this design. And then I just moved the email thread to a smaller group of who the approvers are, because we do not need marketing design by committee, because that is a recipe for like chaos.
And that goes back to one of the core buckets, which is really assigning responsibility. In this case, assigning responsibility to a process, which is totally fine. The thing to be careful with there is you don't want to run into something where you have process for the sake of process. That's one of my like pet peeves. But having a process that creates a manageable flow, that everyone understands what's going on, there's not a lot of ambiguity in requirements or anything like that. I mean, that is crucial to not running into just conflict after conflict with people. Because again, the people who sent you those 20 messages, they all had the best intentions in mind, but they should have sent them before the process was completed. And so I think that's. And it looks like you have something to add.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's it's almost like a fourth pillar, right? Like gathering input, and how are you getting input along the way, even though maybe assignments of approver are out here, like you've got folks who are responsible for that, but who are the stakeholders who needs approval, or who needs input along the way. Yeah, and I think Adobe, you jumped in on the audio here. Anything you'd like to add? Not hearing you. We've got the video, but not the audio.
I'm sorry. I had it was more for a different topic, different question for Ramsey, more so than the current topic.
Bring it in. It's an open discussion, please.
Awesome. And so our startup is a neobank startup, which is similar to what you see with a Chime, Dave. And so one problem that we had in the past was there were already the incumbent neobanking platforms, and so we struggled with the marketing team and the tech team with what do we want our first customer experience to be like. Now we understood that there were already neobanks in the market, and so we didn't know if we wanted to sort of launch our product with this is the first release of your product, or directly try to start competing with the incumbents already. And so I think I had a moment last week where I kind of figured something out. There was an app that I saw on Twitter. It's called Clubhouse. And so they recently raised, I think, $100 million valuation for $2 million. And what they have was a simple one-pager app. They're still in test flight. And so they have people on their own beta. And so it's I don't think that this is where Clubhouse is going to end up eventually. I think they're still going to add more features and still iterate. Now, so I was trying to compare our situation with theirs, where as a neobank, we open the first customer experience is not the full experience, but I guess it gives them an idea. And so our struggle was, what would be the first optimal to introduce to our customer?
I mean, and it's not something that I could just give you the answer, sadly, because ultimately, I think what it's going to come down to is that you're going to have to go out and do research with your potential customers to understand what they're looking for. One of the tricks of that as well is understand the ask under the ask, right? It's an overused quote, but Henry Ford said that if you ask people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So if you're not trying to build a faster horse, then what you have to do is figure out ultimately what are the pain points that they're running into, things that you can do differently than what everybody else is doing, and how do you capitalize on that quickly. If there's features that you're not going to have that other people have, that's fine. I mean, the goal isn't necessarily to have feature parity with everybody out there. At least it shouldn't be, because you're going to just keep spinning in circles. The goal is to find what you can do better than everyone else and do that. So it's my 2 cents, not necessarily,
Yeah, Peter, did you
I mean, as a follow-up to that, my friend, he's over at Spotify, and they have a team specifically trying to pinpoint what that one action is that brings a free user, to become a paid user, right? So there's always, I think you need to look, almost try to create a funnel and try to figure out what is that first step that drives someone to become a non-churning user, essentially, right? So in order to optimize the churn, look at it as a funnel, try to figure out what is the first action try looking at your data, if you have enough data, that is, because typically we see in startups that there's typically not enough data, so you kind of have to make some hypothesis and test stuff out in the beginning. But if you have enough data coming through, snoop around in a back end and figure out what people are actually doing, and if there higher engagement and lower churn on some of the people that have been trying out or testing out certain features in your apps, or certain, been pushed towards certain actions. And then in that process, you can take a look at your onboarding and say, look, if this is the action that drives people to higher engagement, can we start introducing, if you have an app, you can already in the App Store actually start driving people towards that action and that value proposition that you're offering there. because then by introducing your UX earlier and driving toward that one action, you'll start to see a higher engagement with people. But that was just to jump in on this thing. Actually, the all the way back, you know, I know we jump around a little bit here, which is cool. But one of the things that we were talking about earlier in terms of alignment, one of the things that we like to do with clients is to bring different parts of the company into the room. We bring the CEO, if he's available, the CTO or whatever, along with a designer, along with the marketing folks and so on and so forth. And we sit them down in the room and we do what is called a value proposition mapping workshop. I know it's not the easiest thing to do now because it's all virtual, but we've actually done that over Zoom calls. There's some techniques you can do. But what we're really doing is we're asking the question. It's kind of a running joke in the consulting world. You walk into the room and you ask the question, so what are you trying to do here? And then you send them an invoice for like $5,000, you know? Because just by putting them into a room and letting them discuss what they're trying to do, you align the team. So the whole issue, I mean, there's a process to this. What we're really doing is we're looking at customer segments. We're asking what are the tasks that this customer segment is trying to get done. We are looking at different customer segments. What are the pains and gains related to getting those tasks done? And on the other side, where you have your product, you look at your offering, what is the value proposition, and what are your pain relievers and your gain creators that you can match with a specific customer segment. And by discussing these kind of things in a room with different stakeholders, what Jennie was saying earlier, bring the stakeholders together, then you get alignment in the team. And this is the stuff we see all the time. Whenever we pull people into this room, there's always misalignment, and there's always like a lack of understanding of what's going on over on the other side. With the guys, say the CEOs, they have, you know, different ideas of what's important. So on top of that, we often also try to help with creating what we call the KPI framework that essentially pinpoints very specific KPIs that are important to the specific. If you look at a business like, split them on verticals, you have the marketing team, you have the developers, you have the CEOs. The CEOs care about two things: ROI and okay, maybe someone will still ask for installs, but the marketing team they need to know how many people open our emails. The developers need to know how many crashes there are. So we try also to develop KPI frameworks per. I call it vertical, but it's per department, if you will. So yeah, and so that aligned with a general alignment of the team typically gives a much more clear direction of the startup. So there's kind of
focusing on outcomes, I think is really the key there. A lot of people get wrapped up in the how things get done. I think one of the key things is to have a discussion around the why, or to your point, like, I bring that up all the time. Like, why are we here, right? Why are we in this situation? What are the outcomes that you're trying to drive? And a lot of times, just building that cohesive understanding of the outcomes makes it a lot easier to have the conversations around the how. Because people tend to get much more, going back to Corey's comment, like people get a lot more focused on the like, well, I would like it if it looked like this. I'd like it if the button was blue instead of red, or I'd like it if it had all this stuff in there for this LinkedIn
order.
Yeah, and in reality, like what you want to focus on is like, okay, we're doing this to drive this outcome. We should test it. If it works in this iteration, great, and then we can keep testing and iterating. Like that's how a lot of this is driven. And so focusing on the outcomes makes it a lot easier to have those conversations around, why are we trying to pull in 50 different things and really, only 2 or 3 of those are going to have a direct impact on them.
Absolutely. And I think, there's a couple of really key things there, right? The more these different teams come together, maybe the first few projects, it's pretty rough. Yeah, you've got a lot of extra time invested. But then you build your systems and your shorthand as a cross-functional team, and it becomes faster over time. I also want to come back to the comment about, your friend at Spotify, looking at what are those steps that help somebody convert from free to paid, right? And I think that what could be really interesting there is looking at a CX methodology of field work, right? Or going out and trying to understand who are those users, what are they doing, what's important to them, what are the different levels of interaction, and then doing literal field work, right? First, second, third person field work to understand what are those questions. And I think, Adobe, to your point about like trying to understand what the users are wanting, it's really, really critical in the early stages to do that investigative work. Couple of things coming in on the chat, so I want to make sure that we're not leaving those folks out. Malika is in QA and says, not in the room maybe during those ideation phases, and how to handle that when you're getting information kind of end of the road. I mean, to me, QA and making it go smoothly is clear and concise documentation at the upfront before the build. Any other folks have thoughts on that?
I think that's a really good one for process. I'm a big fan of demo dev, demo dev, demo dev, demo dev, like just iterating and demoing the product, either mock-ups, or if you have like a functional demo that you can run, like getting the entire team that's going to be responsible for delivering that out into the world to see it, to feel it, to experience it, I think is incredibly powerful. I will say, I think QA tends to get the short end of the stick of that, where it's like, hey, cool, now it's done, figure out why it doesn't work. Like it's not really fair. And so I think trying to establish that process where, QA is brought in early for early demos so that you can understand, because really, QA can't do their jobs if they don't understand what the customer's supposed to experience, right? They can't do their jobs if they don't understand how the tool is supposed to work. And so I think early on in that demo process, kind of establishing that understanding is really important. How to sell that internally, I think it boils down to, you're going to have product folks who, don't like doing demos because it takes time and because it's hard. I mean, really it is to do a demo of an incomplete product is hard. It's like, well, don't click on that button because that one just crashes everything. But it's worthwhile to them to get that out there because it gets people excited. Like, all of the great product managers I've worked with, get excited about their product, and they want other people to be excited about their product too. And if other people can see it and test it and use it, it's a great way to establish that. So, Adobe, it looks like you have a comment.
Yes. So that's the approach we're trying to deal with them. Getting the product out. And I have a question I have is what would you think is, I guess, the best way to introduce your an app to customers? So in our case, what we wanted to do was allow people get on the wait list, they refer people, and then we start to unlock features for them. Now my concern was is that a good trade-off? Are people willing to do that? Will they just get stuck at like a certain amount of points and not want to upgrade, and then that's just that they leave the app? And so what would you say would be the best I guess way to introduce some customers to your app iteratively?
I mean, it really depends. I think, one of the best things that I've seen from like early apps is word of mouth. So if you can find a group of people, a cohort of people, again, like Peter mentioned, like data is incredibly valuable. Knowing who your core best users are, at least who you think they're going to be, is really important, because then you can focus on their experiences. And then to Jennie's point, like you want to be able to go out and do those kind of qualitative surveys as well, because the data is one piece of the equation. Understanding what users think and feel about it is the other piece of the equation. And I've tried, but I can't get feelings out of data. It's really hard.
It is a little tough to get the what does that attribute really mean, you know? And
something NPS surveys, something.
And just quick plug, you know, speaking of great product managers, one of our product managers from Airship, Lisa Orr, is going to be talking in a side session today at 4:30 Eastern time. So if you guys have not added that to your schedule yet, please do. She's got some super onboarding stuff to share with you. So definitely hit that side session. You know, one other question coming in the chat, Ramsey, is a resource. Victoria, she works in marketing, and she says sometimes she's trying to work closely with the dev team, needs some data, but is having a hard time proving the case to the dev team to get that data. But if you don't have the data, how do you prove your case? So definitely would love to hear some discussion on that one. Thanks, Victoria, for sharing it.
Yeah, and again, like I feel like marketing is one of those orgs that tends to get a lot of the brunt of people's ire. When things are going well, marketing's riding on the backs of dev, and when things are going poorly, well, obviously it's marketing's fault. So I think when it comes to working with development teams, it helps to work in their environment. So if you're requesting things, you know, from the dev team, understand they probably have a backlog of Jira tickets that they're trying to prioritize. They probably have, you know, they're probably working in sprints, or they're using, you know, Kanban to manage those tasks. I would ask them how to get that data how to get that request to them. I will say, working with a lot of development teams, they don't like it when you just come by and say, hey, I need this. Like, they want, you know, documentation, a task created, something that gives them a thread back to that. Because you know, it's really easy in the development world to go into a rabbit hole and be there for days, and then the thing that somebody asked you for 2 or 3 days ago is completely gone. So I would say that's a good way to do it, is ask them, you know, how would you like for me to get this request to you? Peter, it looks like you have a comment.
I think it's definitely a major issue with marketing folks not being close to the data, and I think one of the reasons that I was really excited the first time I saw AppBoy, or what is now Brace, is because they're solving, if you will, one of those issues that it kind of brings the data closer to the folks that are actually creating the marketing, the communication, right? The people that are actually sitting there developing the communication. How can we get them closer to the data? And I think it can be solved with better tools, right? So when you start using tools like Airship is one of them, or Brace, or some of these top tools where you have the people that are in communication actually being hands-on on those tools, they can set up their A/B tests, right? They can start testing their hypothesis. They have ideas for, I have a feeling it's blue better than red. I mean, all this kind of stuff. Well, test it, give them the tools to set up these tests, make the UX easy, make it easy to run these kind of experiments. And I think when you start using these tools, I think you're going to see there's going to be less need for this kind of like complicated communication, being like, I need to figure that. Yes, we need to dive into the data. Sometimes you need people that are really like, okay, let me research this, right? We all need to do that sometimes, but a lot of the easier questions, if you will, can be answered by actually just using proper tools. So I don't know if this, you know, Victoria, if this is something like, if you don't have these tools already, or if there might be almost like a what do you call it? A key holder? What is the right name? Like someone.
Gatekeeper.
Gatekeeper, right? Is there a gatekeeper, right? So to using these tools, because that is definitely something we see can eliminate that need.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, plug for Airship. Like we've got performance analytics, which seeks to solve that as well. Where it's like, you know, typically asking somebody in marketing, not picking on marketers again, but some of them are very skilled in SQL, but asking a marketer in general to go and write a SQL query to get data out of some sort of database, or, you know, God forbid that it's in like Hadoop and you have to actually write something like Spark to pull that data out of there and make it useful. You know, we have, you know, there's tools out there that can help with that. I think one of the challenges that you'll run into there that you want to be careful with is the tools. Especially whenever you're trying to sell a tool internally, you have to go to the stakeholders and make sure they understand why you're asking for it. If you just go and say, hey, you know, I want to implement, you know, Amplitude, one of our partners, to get better analytics. Cool. Well, we already have analytics. Okay. So then you have to kind of get into the pain points and understand and be, again, vulnerable and say, like, look, like, you are not giving me the data I need as quickly as I need it. It is impacting my ability to do my job. And ultimately, I don't want to come to you every week with 50 requests, because I understand that it's almost like nagging. So finding those kind of commonalities and being open and upfront with people about, like, why you're asking for things is really helpful. And then, to Peter's point, like, there's a bunch of vendors out there, a lot of them in this conference, who can help with a lot of that. So.
Yeah, and I think it's also, Victoria, to your question, is helping build up a culture of collaboration, right? So, what is that give and take? And as Ramsey said, helping get the why understood, right? It's not just another data request, it's connected to something. What's that long-term vision? And finding an ally to build up that relationship so that you can have collaboration between the teams. I mean, I really do think those first few projects together are tough to build that trust and collaboration. But once you get the train rolling, the wheels keep turning, so to speak.
One thing that Sam actually mentioned earlier that's really cool with that is, if you try and find out the level of effort and, like, the tools they're using and the processes they're using to get you that data, like, ask them, like, okay, what does it take to get this data? Is it something that you can teach me how to do? No. Okay, you don't want me touching that. Okay, well, what are you doing? Like, I'm just generally curious. Those are the types of conversations that can lead to either A, at some point they'll give you a view access into the database, or B, at some point, like, they may just automate that, and they'll do it just because they appreciate you trying to understand what it takes to actually get that data. Because that's another thing, is a lot of people, it's easy to say I want data. It's sometimes very hard to actually get that data. And yeah.
I absolutely. And Victoria just weighed back in on the chat and said that they're actually a pretty small team with no PMs, right? And I think that culture of collaboration can be tricky in a small team. You would think maybe it would be easier in a smaller organization, but normally, if you work in a small company, everybody is so jammed up. I mean, it reminds me of my days in the not-for-profit world, where everybody was wearing 12 hats, right? And it's difficult to get the access and attention sometimes when everyone is so busy. So curious of the thoughts of the group on that one.
I'm a huge fan of product managers. If resources and time were infinite, there'd be no need for product managers, but resources and time are not infinite. And so product managers really do help kind of coordinate. Product managers, program managers, project managers, vertical managers, like there's infinite names for these people whose job it is to help coordinate and kind of drive this process. So in this case, it's probably going to be you. you're whether you want to be a PM or not, you're going to have to kind of manage the process and manage a lot of those interactions. To Jennie's point, it's wearing multiple hats. So.
And Victoria, this is such a great point too, that normally they were getting up and walking to each other's desks, but now, like, you can't just go like pop by, which is certainly tricky. I'm full-time remote, and I know Ramsey is remote part-time, so it's something that even in regular days, I think is it's hard to knock on the door sometimes. I like to have regular Slack check-ins, even if it's just a little ping like, hey, how are your kids, kind of touch points, like, I'm still here, even though I'm remote.
We've got about 6 minutes left, I think.
Minutes. Any more questions?
I mean, again, I think coming back to those core points, it's you have to be willing to assign responsibility to people. It's one of those things a lot of people try and shy away from saying, I need you to do this, because it's, it feels like you're basically telling somebody what needs to be done. In a lot of cases, that's the best outcome. And doing so in a way that it's a repeatable process, that it's something that everybody understands how it's being assigned is really important.
I have a question before we leave, because it might tie into Victoria's question again. Sorry.
Please go.
So one of the things, by the way, I didn't mean to plug any specific toolkit. I think there's like all of the toolkits today are actually almost up to speed. They kind of all do really amazing things. So one of the things that we often see is that organizations that work with startups versus corporate, they have they need different tools and different, let me put it differently. I would say some of the bigger tools are better suited for corporate these days. It's a little harder to get started with as a small startup with some of these more expensive tools. So what do you guys, because I just noticed here that you guys are with Airship, I guess, right? So how do you guys support the smaller businesses, the startups that come around that have very limited budget to go and roll out like a whole engagement toolkit, for example, within that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. One is, especially if you're a startup, don't go out and buy every tool. Make sure that you're purchasing the tools that are going to give you the best outcome based off of your requirements quickly. Because there's, you can buy an analytics tool, you can buy, a marketing tool, you can buy, a lot of different tools. There are things that you're going to build. And I think one thing to be aware of as well is, especially if you're in a startup stage, don't build things for forever, build things for now, with the intention of essentially replacing those once you need something better. I've seen a lot of cases where a startup, they'll go out and they'll build like this massive data lake and have all of these great plumbing and pieces and things like that, when in reality, they don't have enough data for that.
Right.
And I think, that's really the key thing is, and if you haven't seen it, like it's one of my favorite diagrams to show people whenever they're like, what do you do? Well, like here's the MarTech 5000. And here's where we are on the MarTech 5000. Like there's so many different companies out there, so many different tools. A lot of them, like us, for example, have like free and e-commerce versions that you can try things out and see how they work. And you can pay for more premium features. But really, I think it comes down to don't have the intention of building everything, don't have the intention of buying everything, and make sure that whatever process you're going through for acquiring tools or building internal tools, the goal is to get things working now, especially in the startup stage, because you can't wait 6 months to build the perfect data lake, because you need to be working right now. So.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've got 2 minutes left, and an amazing e-commerce question just came in, hot off the presses on the chat, so I'm going to get it in here before we lose time. Paul asks, how do you balance when you have internal customers, so customer care teams, web dev teams, and they're using the products, and their needs are conflicting with the end customer need. So how do we balance that? And I think that's a super one. I personally at Airship had worked on a couple of projects where we were doing messaging through our platform for internal customer teams. So Paul, exactly as you're saying, right? Not just what's going out to the end, buyer or shopper in an e-commerce situation, but folks who are on customer care or store associates in a retail situation. It's a great call out.
I think there's ways to do that with, again, being vulnerable, like send out a survey to people who use your internal product and say, hey, what do you think of this? And, just, it's the same thing that you would do with your actual customers, sending out an NPS survey. And inviting that feedback, I think, is really important. It's, a lot of people shy away from inviting feedback like that because it does mean that somebody might call your baby ugly. I'm a firm believer that every product has, its value. Every product has a reason to exist, but they all have to improve. And to be able to improve, you have to out those improvements. Internal customers are still customers.
They're
and you still have
customers
to ask
too. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, Paul, I'd even say everything that we said about doing work for an end customer, I'd apply that for your internal folks, right? Like how do they want to use the product, and what are their needs and cohorts, right? What are those user segments that you need to address? And I think Ramsey, we are at time here. I do want to just do a quick plug if everybody wants to take a look at the screen. I think I can maximize this. We have a couple of sessions as well as booths where you can pop in for live demos today. All this is on the schedule, but one of our customers, Zillow, and Mike Herrick, who heads up our tech team, are going to be having a fireside chat, so to speak, later, 3:45 Eastern time. Lisa Orr is going to be on a side session at 4:30 Eastern time. She's one of our product managers. And then we have our two booths. And Amber, keep me honest, it's 3 o'clock Eastern and 5 p.m. Eastern, I believe, here for our two booths. All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I don't know if the system is gonna just slice us off since we're over time, but definitely appreciate all the feedback and discussion. And Ramsey, always fun to chat from a distance here, and we'll talk more soon. Thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.